Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of New Ways of Being. And today with me, I have another wonderful guest. Her name is Diane Williams. You may have heard of her. And this should be a fun conversation. We are going to have that conversation about how we can change the world by raising human consciousness. And Diane has been very involved in that and committed to that for quite some time. So, Diane, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Raymond. It's great to be here and talk about one of my favorite subjects.
Good. Yes. Well, so I know that I do a very short bio, and but I know that Diane is the founder and executive director of the Source of Synergy Foundation. And through that, she formed something called the Evolutionary Leaders Circle that has been very involved in this, uh, uh, not just the conversations, but being very active in leading the way in the evolution of consciousness. But certainly Diane has done that. But Diane, I'd like you to just tell your story, how you came to start this organization and kind of your story through, I don't know, the last 10 years or whatever it's been and up to today. So please go ahead.
Well, thank you so much. Well, the source of synergy really was just a seed in 2006. And at that point in time, I was doing a lot of work with the United Nations. And I was noticing that a lot of the ways that we engaged with the UN was through listening to people speaking. And I felt, okay, that's important, but there was something missing. I felt what was missing was people really being able to come together and synergize their thoughts and their wisdom, their skills, and really kind of create this synergistic engagement that we know whenever people come together and create synergy, something higher comes out than what maybe you could have done alone. And I remember one specific moment. I was at the Commission on Human Rights in Geneva. I was in Geneva at the time. And I remember people were like just checking their cell phones. They weren't really totally present to what they were hearing, because they were hearing like some of the worst atrocities ever. But it was like they were distracted because you can only listen for so long. So I said, okay, how can I be part of the solution to this? So I said, let me create an organization that is about creating opportunities for synergy, where people can come together in synergy circles, in dialogues, and other forms of engagement to really make an impact in that way. So in 2006, I was part of a program called Passion to Connect in New York City. And in the green room, I had the opportunity to talk to Deepak Chopra, who was also a guest on that program. And he was asking me, what was I doing these days? And I said, well, my heart is really wanting to bring people together, individuals, organizations, and networks in synergy so we could see, how we could be a greater impact and really help to shift consciousness, which you're talking about. And he said, great, let's do that together. And at that time, he had a Chopra Center in New York at the Dream Hotel. Actually, right now, we went to a reception recently because he's starting a Chopra house in New York, which we're all really excited about. So we had our very first meeting. We called it a retreat at the Chopra Center in New York. And people came together and we talked about, well, how can we really help shift consciousness together? And people really enjoyed it and they wanted to keep meeting. So we kept meeting every year. And then we said, okay, this is really something that's valuable. So let's put all of our attention as an organization. That's when Source of Synergy first started in 2006 on synergy. So since then, we've we've really blossomed. We have almost 30 synergy circles and collaboratories on different topics, like youth and the environment and women's. We have a lot of different ways that people synergize. And we notice that partnerships start to form and people start writing books together and they do projects together. So we notice that so much comes out of this synergy. So that's really how it started. I'm actually right now not the executive director. I'm the president and just founder. We have a wonderful executive director named Barbara Leighton,
Oh,
who took the reins. Yes, so I can have a little bit more time. But it's amazing. We have Deborah Moldow, who you know, who's our director of the Evolutionary Leaders Circle. Kurt Johnson runs our synergy circles, and we have an amazing team, and we feel very blessed.
yes. That's absolutely amazing. And I'd love to hear that because, you know, I think many people, and I'd like to believe most people see that the world needs some change and that it is changing. And of course, a lot of people, if they pay attention to the news, they might see more negative than positive. But, um, you know, people do say, what can I do to change the world? And there seems to be limited ways to many people, but I've been amazed since I undertook this project of this book to discover just, even beyond the evolutionary leaders, how many nonprofits have been formed and just other kinds of activities that are going on in the world that are focused on this same idea of raising human consciousness and doing what we can. So I'm so glad you did this with Deepak. And I'm so pleased to be able to meet you and talk about this and share ideas. So we're going to dive into this conversation. And, um, you said you began with doing a lot of activity with the United Nations. Now, was this just on your own or a part of some organization before you formed your own?
Yeah, I've been a UN representative for various NGOs for many years. I started at the UN in New York. I was part of a spiritual caucus, and that spiritual caucus was in New York, and then it was birthed in Geneva. And then in Geneva, a group of us started a committee on spirituality, values, and global concerns. And at some point, I moved back to New York, and then I founded that committee at the UN in New York, which is still going strong. The committee in Geneva is now 23 years old. I'm more engaged with New York because I live in New York City. But our committee in New York is just past, well, last October was 20 year. We had our 20-year anniversary.
Uh,
And yeah, this year, 21st anniversary. And also with this committee, we have different ways that we engage. We just did a couple weeks ago the Spirit of the United Nations Awards, where we honor people that really embody the spiritual essence of the United Nations, in terms of cooperation, wanting to work in unity. And we always honor an ambassador, we honor a member of the staff, a member of an NGO, and a youth. So that's every year. And I am the coordinator of one of the working groups of the committee, which is to try to get Global Oneness Day on the UN calendar. So I think you know our friend Steve Farrell and
right,
Humanities Team.
right.
And our committee worked with them many years ago, about 15 years ago. They came to the UN. They asked if we would collaborate with them on spreading awareness about Global Oneness Day. So we did that together, and now feels like the time to try to get an actual day. So I've been working with Steve and other colleagues, Ambassador Chaudhry, many colleagues, where we're going around and we're talking to different ambassadors from member states and trying to really show them how important oneness is in terms of meeting the goals of the UN, which is to create peace, and
Right.
harmony in the
Right.
world. So, and we really feel like if there's a day dedicated to oneness, we could have activities in schools, in communities, where we really embody those characteristics of what it means to be one with each other, because that's the essence of really who we are. So that's mainly what I do at the UN. But like what we do with Source of Synergy, we work with, humanities team, Unity Earth, Unified. There's many different groups, and we really feel like one entity. We just hold our different part of the puzzle, but we come together as a collective team, and work together to shift consciousness on the planet. And same thing with the UN. We work with different NGOs, we work with member states, we work with UN staff. Many people, like just recently on Thursday, many of us came together at the UN meditation room
Mm.
where we meditate. Usually it's for the best interest, whatever we feel at the moment that needs our spiritual support. So if the UN has something like, the Commission on the Status of Women, which is always in March, we will put our spiritual energy towards women equality. So there's many ways we engage, but one of my passions is really that spiritual, having that spiritual connection with each other. And sometimes we sit in silence before a meeting, just to hold the intention that the highest outcome will emerge.
Well, that's fantastic. I love that. I recently I was thinking that I wish, I'm working with so many of the evolutionary leaders in this book project has been incredible. Just amazing people. And I think I counted up one day, there are 21 participants besides myself in the book currently. And I think I counted that 13 or 14 are on the evolutionary leaders uh, circle, I guess.
Mhm.
And it, it's just so, what I was thinking was I, I need more active community going on. And, you know, uh, this is a very good experience, and I want to keep these friendships that are forming to, that are people who are working on the book, but are just have so much in common with me. And the world needs more of these kinds of things, of um, being a part of an organization that has regular meditations that we call into or get on a Zoom or whatever it is. And I've heard of a few and things that come and go. It sounds like the one you just mentioned is very regular, and that's fantastic. And so, but we need more of those.
Absolutely. I think what you said is like feeling connected to a community, because we heard that a lot when we invite people to be part of the evolutionary leader circle. They'll say, I need community. I need to feel like I'm connected to people that share a similar, understanding and a similar mission of
Right.
how I want to interact with the world, and not to feel like, we're doing this in isolation, because we have
Right.
a very, all the same mission. And it feels so much better to be able to do that as a team, as a collective.
Right. And yeah, I need to reach out to Steve Farrell. And Humanities Team has done some of that off and on, but I don't know that they're still doing it. So I need to check on what they're doing. But yeah, so what you just said is so important. We need more community uh, sharing the idea of oneness and unity and peace. Um, Robert Atkinson is, right, and so many others are right there too, saying the same thing, that community is important. And And he pointed that out in his new book, The Way of Unity.
Hmm.
Um,
Absolutely.
but I know that some people are kind of forming their own little communities,
Hmm.
and that's another good way. Um, and so what we need to find a way of being, one point that people can go to find out about these kinds of communities. I don't know if there's a one that really stands out as a common framework or
Well,
source.
I think, what's really important is because this is something that we are going to put on we're reworking our Source of Synergy website because we really want people to have the tools to create their own synergy circles or community within their schools or their neighborhood. Um, because I think it's really important to have that where you're at as well because when you're actually together sharing atoms as opposed to online, and online is great too, but I
Right,
think nothing replaces in-person community.
right,
So what steps do you need to take? First you need to have a theme or a purpose, of your circle or synergy circle or whatever you want to form. So even if it's just keeping your neighborhood clean, cleaning up the beaches, cleaning
right.
up your neighborhood or creating a community garden, finding other people that want to do that with you and then meeting on a regular basis and having conversations where there's deep listening and where everybody's skills and expertise are nourished and that can flourish into something that the collective needs. So I think really encouraging people to start community wherever they are is
Yeah.
key.
Well, that's fantastic. I'll go check out that website and
Well, it's in development. Maybe in a couple months
oh,
it will
okay,
be online. But we thought we really want the next iteration of our website to be about community and everybody is a source of synergy themselves. Whether it's a random act of, or a conscious act of kindness, I should say, or, we all can create synergy in every moment of our lives.
great. That is fantastic.
Mhm.
And I was not aware of that, so it's good to hear that that's happening. And and I'll spread the word too.
Thank you.
So thank you for doing that.
You're
It's
welcome.
a really wonderful thing. Let's talk about what you see happening in the world. The good news I've heard, I so, so far from everyone I've interviewed for this book, the response has been that they are very optimistic about what's happening regarding unity and peace, that we are moving in the right direction, although often you can't see much of what's happening, but a lot is happening. That's incredible. And certainly what we need to share with the world. And I love what you said about the way you have those meditations at the UN, et cetera, that we all of us that are wanting to be active in this are the ones who need to demonstrate unity and peace to the world. And that's what you're doing. But talk a bit more about your perception of that, about um, in response to if someone says just, the world is going to pieces, it's it just does not look optimistic. How would you respond?
Okay, when you asked that question, I thought about my mother, who always said when we're kids, and even now, to try to spend most of your time listening to positive news. Like you need to live in the reality of the world. There's a lot of suffering. And of course, we have to do what we can about that suffering. We see what's happening in Gaza, we see what's happening in Sudan. You know, can we send, if we can afford it, can we send funds over, so people's lives will be better? Can we send our meditative support over to people that really need it? There's always something that we could do with the tools that we have to support, others in need. And I think that always has to be on our radar. But I think if we spend like most of our time watching news that's very negative, us versus them, this duality, and not news. I think there's certain news channels that really try to have the full picture of what's happening in the world, and not necessarily, having to put others down in order to elevate your view or your opinion. And I used to live in Europe. I lived in Europe for 13 years, in Italy and the Netherlands. And I was really struck by how in those countries, the news that you watch is so well balanced.
Oh.
It's not about judgment. It's not the same story for, weeks. It has stories from every country of the world. You really become more of a global citizen. So I think that's really key. And then we hear a lot about raising consciousness, or the importance of a shift in consciousness, so that we can have a world that works for everyone. But I think first, it's important for humanity to align on what we mean by consciousness. And, because we're hoping that this elevated consciousness is going to create unity and peace. But I think we really have to sit with that question, because personally, I think consciousness is the fundamental essence of our existence.
Yes.
And it's non-local, so beyond space and time, including beyond the confines of our brain. And I think the brain just serves more of as an instrument, right? Or a receiver within consciousness. But consciousness, in my view, is really the source of all that is. Some people call it God, the divine source. There are many names for consciousness. And I think it's really key that we understand that we are one with this consciousness.
Right.
It's really what we are. It's the part of us that's eternal. And it's what we all have in common. We're all manifestations of this divine, creative, pure consciousness. So there's no reason to have this sense of, polarity in the world. Everything in the cosmos arises from this consciousness. And, we could look to all matter, energy, like waves in the ocean of consciousness. And it's the source of all our experiences. So everything is a creation of and arises from this consciousness. Right? In order to truly live as one in the world, right, where we want peace and unity, it's important that we remember that we, really who we are. And when we do that, it restores our connection to the source of life itself, the creative, loving, intelligent consciousness that animates everything. And when we forget who we are, we begin to live in separation and limitation. But when we remember who we are, we can only live in oneness, and in peace,
right,
and unity and abundance and love. And we radiate this inheritance, right? And it's super important that our state of consciousness aligns with this inherent essence of divine consciousness. So really, in order to have a world that is kind and nourishing and free of war and poverty and inequality and the destruction of our planet and all forms of duality that we, often see, we have to embody, as a spiritual being having a human experience, the nature and characteristics of source consciousness, which is our inherent pure nature. So, if I may, I'd like to just share 8 characteristics that I think if we align with source consciousness, I think every social issue of the world would be solved. So go ahead.
And I agree. What you said was beautiful. You put it very nicely, and I agree 100%. It's exactly what I believe. And please go ahead. Tell us your thoughts there about 8. How did you say that? 8?
Yeah, it's 8 kind of characteristics, or really the nature of consciousness, which I feel if we just align with our pure essence, who we are, which is consciousness, I think, the peace and unity that we want to see will definitely unfold, but it's really up to us to embody who we really are. So I think first is source consciousness is creative and intelligent, right? It
Yes.
created the multiverse and everything in it,
Right. Right.
including us, right? Including ourselves. And its intelligence is always expressing itself like we do. So, you create uplifting podcasts, right? We
Mhm.
create projects that make a difference in the world. We make babies, out of love. We're aligning with this source consciousness. And when we create consciously and lovingly, our creations mirror this consciousness.
Mhm.
So, second, I think the nature of consciousness is loving, right?
Right.
It's divine love, beautifully embracing all that is. And love is really, I think, the organizing intelligence and frequency of consciousness.
Right.
So its loving embrace guides us to our true nature. And when we embody like compassion and forgiveness or empathy and treat everyone we encounter as sacred, we are activating this source frequency.
Mhm.
And we are consciously in communication with this consciousness. And when we act in a loving manner without causing harm to others, we are embodying source consciousness. And when we do conscious acts of kindness on a regular basis, you're activating this source frequency. And you will see how your frequency will rise, right? I take my dog, he's a therapy dog, and I
Mhm.
take him to a nursing home. And we go and visit people, and a lot of people are in memory care, and we just see like how his love and for them, and how they love him back, and we both leave with a spiritual high, because it's just something small, but it really changes the vibration. So every small act done consciously really ripples far beyond that moment. And when we know the energy of love always multiplies and amplifies the source field with infinite love, right? So the third characteristic is consciousness is expansive.
Mhm.
It naturally gives itself in its creation and those creations like us. It gives us an opportunity to create as well. So, like books and projects,
Right.
everything we see, feel, and experience really arises from this infinite, expansive generosity. And we have to unlearn that we're limited, because unlearning limitation requires that you see yourself as consciousness and remembering itself through you. So, sometimes we think, oh, I can't do this, I don't have the power to do this. Well, no, that's a limitation, because consciousness is not limited,
Right.
it's very expansive. So the fourth, halfway through, is consciousness communicates non-locally and is ever present and accessible. So it's the field that everything appears in, and it communicates instantaneously.
Right.
It communicates through resonance and matching frequency of intention, thoughts, and feelings. And that's why it's important to think positively.
Right.
So that is what we draw to us. So the consciousness field really gives us signals and nudges and synchronicities and dreams and downloads and inspiration and meaningful coincidences and intuition and sudden knowings or insights that come from this consciousness field. So this is how pure consciousness communicates with us. And because we are entangled in this field, we can offer a prayer or do a meditation or create an intention that will have a non-local ripple effect and shift
Right.
something,
Right.
right? And
Yep.
many things in the same field. And we can all tune into this field, especially when we quiet the mind and focus on the subtle field that we're part of. And
Right.
then when you're in this state, you can invite an alive, aware, and receptive consciousness to communicate with you. And I've tried that many times, and it works.
Yep.
You get the communication back, and perhaps you have a question or a desire, and you just offer it to the field and trust the field has received it, and you get a response. I'm sure you've experienced
Oh,
that.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Beautiful. Yeah.
So
Keep
the
going.
so the fifth is consciousness is all knowing. It's the ground of all knowledge. So every idea, every invention, perception, possibility, potential that ever existed within awareness is in this ground of all knowing. And that's why you hear that inventors or composers often feel as though they remembered rather than invented, right? Or composed.
Right.
So, and I know certain inventions happen at the same time across the world before the internet, right? Hundreds of years ago. Um, so we have that within us as well. We can tap into all the knowledge of the universe and experience vast, boundary free knowing. We just have to trust the wisdom of consciousness expressing through us. And I think all the knowledge of how to solve all of the global challenges that are currently on our planet can be solved in this way. And
Yes.
I think the key is that we develop our inherent capacities, like remote healing or telepathy or our psychic abilities, so we can communicate more. It'll be more easy for us to communicate, I think, with the field. And I remember, I think you might know the Hertogs, JJ and Desiree Hertog, Dr. Hertogs. They told me a story where there was a fire in Sedona, and they got their community together to just put their intention on the fire moving and then dissipating, and that's what happened. And it was quite a miracle. And then there's like I know somebody named Bobby, and he's like a savant, and he could open the telephone directory for a second and then be able to tell you all the phone numbers and names. Where did he
Right.
extract this knowledge from?
Right.
So
Yes.
that's pretty amazing. So it's there just for us to tap into. And the sixth one is consciousness. Consciousness is infinite. So like our souls are infinite, source consciousness has no beginning or end. It's eternal, beyond birth and death, just like us. We continue as pure consciousness, right? Or some say souls when our bodies die. I mean, I do believe that. I've had experiences because I had a near-death experience, and I saw that. So if we really knew that we never die, how would we live our lives differently? So I think that's really important for people to understand,
Right.
because then they wouldn't have fear of death or aging. They would just know that, their soul, their consciousness continues.
Right.
So the seventh is consciousness is light and luminosity. And in many traditions, source is considered the light of awareness itself. We see that as a repeated theme in many traditions. And that's why meditators often see clear light when meditating, I believe. Or when people have near-death experiences. When I had mine when I was drowning as a young child, I saw light. Yeah, I was able to see light and feel this beautiful presence and energy and love, and just bathe in this radiance with this light. So I think at the fundamental level, the universe, the creator, is literally light manifesting as matter. And when we become mirrors of the light of consciousness through our loving presence, our inner light naturally shines through our vibration, through our eyes. You see people with shining eyes, our voice, our spirit. We all feel good when we're in that presence, when somebody's really emanating their light. And we can help others see their own inner radiance, even when they cannot see it in themselves, especially if we shine our light. And the last one is consciousness is the embodiment of oneness. So in consciousness, there is no separation, no duality, no discrimination, no war, no me or you, because everything exists as a oneness field of being. And consciousness is oneness expressing itself. And consciousness experiences itself through this network of interbeing, the field of being that connects like every soul, every particle, every star. Like the light in your cells was born in the stars. And in oneness, every act of love is considered, I think, self-recognition. And every negative thought or word or action is really forgetting one's true nature. So we just need to live our daily lives with the knowing and truly model all the qualities and characteristics of consciousness, this source consciousness. And the more we awaken to who we truly are as luminous beings of consciousness, the more the world around us begins to reflect that truth. So the extraordinary really becomes our collective reality. And this collective shift in reality just starts to create new social systems, right? And we just see higher values that manifest. And soon we'll have a world based on oneness and cooperation and light. So I think it's literally that simple. You know, it's something that we could all do. It's in our hands. So we just have to really fully embrace ourselves as this pure consciousness.
Thank you. That was absolutely beautiful. And you said so many things that I wanted to respond to and react to, but I wanted to hold them off because I wanted you to kind of go through the eight because these characteristics of the one consciousness, one universal consciousness, is so important that that helps. It does help understand what one consciousness is and what that means. Just conceptually, that's can be hard for people to grasp, but you really kind of painted the picture of what it is and what it means. I love the one story you mentioned about you and your dog visiting senior facilities. I am a musician. I uh, perform at senior facilities around Denver um, every week, usually multiple shows a week. And I've done like over 700, but it is always just wonderful, to see how the seniors react to hearing the music they grew up with, that they love, that they can sing along with. And yes, they respond to sharing something that like that. And I do share it as love. Um, this there's so many things we could say about how we can see the world differently. And I love what you described in that, the eight characteristics. It just really, I think it helps people to understand. I kind of, um, in the first chapter of the book, and I wrote one when I started, and then I threw it away and I said, "Yeah, this is not doing what I wanted to do yet." I wrote a different chapter, and my goal was to try to kind of bridge. Let's see, I think it was Julie Kroll that said, I think she talked about one consciousness 1.0, human consciousness 1.0, or beingness, and 2.0, and the difference. 2.0 is when we're fully awake to the oneness, the unity that is. It's not. It's always there, whether we know it or not. Um, and so I was wanting it to bridge from the kind of the 1.0 belief in separation to a, a view of unity and oneness and love. And I hope I've done that. And in the process, I did kind of break out a number of different characteristics, almost the same ones that you mentioned, but I didn't do it as a list. But I thought that was so helpful the way you described that and explained it. It really helps people to have some understanding. So, and there you said many other things that I could go talk about, but in let's talk a little bit about very much right now what we see so much of in the world, not just the news, but in most people's behaviors, and what they talk about is a belief in separation. And out of separation comes fear. So a lot of fear-based thinking and fear-based behavior. And so I say we need to shift from that consciousness to a consciousness of unity and love. And so the question then arises, and someone might ask, how do I do that? Um, so yeah, respond to that. You did answer that already in several ways, but yeah, answer that question. How can people make that shift?
Well, I think they could use your example as a model. Like you go to the nursing homes, you play music for them, music that they could relate to. I mean, that is an act of love. You don't care what political party they're from, you
Mhm.
don't care, their race, their religion.
Right.
You do it because and I know there's been studies that talked about when you help another person, because a lot of people, why are they depressed and, get into a cycle of, kind of going down and not really going out of their houses. A lot of young kids are, experiencing that as well. But they say, like, one of the number one things that you can do to get out of depression is to help or support others,
Mhm.
and then that in turn helps you uplift your spirit as well. So it's mutually beneficial. And
Right.
that's something that anybody can do anywhere. So it doesn't have to, because I think a lot of people, especially young people, they feel somewhat powerless because it's so overwhelming to see all of the social issues that are happening in the world that they just don't know where to start.
Right.
So even if you start with one person, if they're in school and they see maybe somebody being bullied or somebody looking sad, um, befriend that person. Just be their friend, show them love, show them, that you're interested in them and what they have to offer the world, but also, talk about what's going on in their lives. And I think that's a big way to bridge this polarity that we experience. And it's something that we could all do. So I think that's really key. It doesn't always have to be on a, on a level that we think it has to be, in. And
Right.
like I said earlier, our model, and I was just on Rianne Eisler's show. She wrote The Chalice and the Blade. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Rianne Eisner, but she just had a summit on this.
Yep.
So it was going from kind of domination culture to a partnership culture, and what does that look like? How do we get beyond this, sense of us versus them? And I think that's what it is. Like part of it is partnership. So whether it's partnership with one person, whether it's partnership with all the people in the nursing home, it's creating a partnership. Like it's creating a we space.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I think as soon as we see ourselves as this collective, we're one. So what affects you affects me. And, do what you can in the free time that you have, really prioritize that. Sometimes we prioritize, exercise, which is important, and, getting our needs met. But how can we go beyond one step and prioritize someone else or another community? What would that look like?
Beautiful. Yes, I agree. It's interesting, and I think your example is perfect. It's interesting how um, there is depth in that you might say, well, that's nice, but what does that do? But there's a depth in that many people wouldn't immediately realize. It does connect us to our natural desire to be part of the whole, to serve the whole, to connect to love, which is universal and so important in the universe itself. I believe it kind of the world is. So I've said in the past that the world is held together by love, whether you would know it or not, and it might be in a way that you might describe as uh, that love. You know, science has recently learned that consciousness is a fundamental part of the universe. And
Hmm.
that was not true up until just very, very recently, in like the last 10 years. And that love is a part of that. And and unity is a fundamental aspect of the universe. And love is you that could be I believe it is what allows the universe to be one whole, to
Mm.
be expressing a unity. And and we could talk about it in many different ways, but you're absolutely right that tapping into that, um, how can I connect with other people, um, and finding a way to do that, even in the simplest way of being friendly when you meet someone on the street or in the store, that is a part of that. And so that is so fundamental and so important. I'm glad you pointed that out.
Yeah, because
Um,
it's our nature. You feel good, like when you're loving and you're kind and you're giving and you're conscious of every person, everybody's on your radar, like that's your nature. So like how you feel when those interactions happen because you're at one with your true nature.
yes, absolutely. I'm making a note here myself. Um, so I'm going to back up a little bit um, to the United Nations because, you know, what United Nations, from the very beginning, I think a lot of people saw that it had so much potential to kind of help shift consciousness in the world. And United Nations from the beginning has done a lot of things that are very much in line with that. But then, because they are a coming together of nations, and so much of what they do is driven by what nations decide to support or not support, then there's a reality that kind of limits what the United Nations can do. But it's it's just to me, it's wonderful when you talk about things that are kind of behind the scenes of the meditations that occur on a regular basis and the committees and sub organizations that are a part of it. Talk a little bit more about that because I think that's also universal. There's different people who are doing different things, like through nonprofits, um, that most people aren't aware of,
Hmm.
but they're there. So, I think that's important. And, how how the world actually or humanity evolves in consciousness to shift so that we see that more in our reality is kind of the question mark that hangs out there. How will this conscious evolution unfold? Talk about your view on that. I'd love to
Yeah.
hear.
Well, the initial impulse to create the United Nations, I think, was very pure because it was after two world wars, right? And there was so much devastation and, death. And so people came together and said, we can't have this ever happen again. We really have to come together as one humanity, as a collective. And you're right. I think, you know, of course, there's member states, and they sometimes have to advocate for, what their programs are, their policies are. And, it's not perfect, but it's what we have, right now. It's the initial intention to be this harmonizing body, I feel, is still there. I think people join the United Nations or they become staff members of the United Nations or they work in NGO committees because they really care. They really want to make an impact and in the way that they, feel they best can. And I personally feel like when I had to sit with it and say, how do I want to use my energy um, in terms of this, harmonizing body? And it was really going back to what I know is part of my mission on earth. And that's really the spiritual dimension to support the UN in seeing that everything is based, in the spiritual dimension. It's how we came into being. And we can't forget that, like we were talking earlier. So I think creating, co-creating in Geneva and then creating in New York this Committee on Spirituality, Values, and Global Concerns was really part of that, knowing that if we recognize spiritual values and qualities like cooperation and peace and being in unity and harmony and acting as one human community, I think that's the biggest impact that I could help make with others that have the same vision and mission. And so even though maybe it's not huge groups of people meditating, I think even a small group of us in the meditation room holding that intention can do a lot. I really believe that the power of our intention, like Lynn McTaggart, who's one of, our friend Lynn, who's one of the guests on the program, like it can shift things. Like it doesn't always have to be, doing work on the ground or, getting kind of trapped a little bit in the bureaucracy of creating reports and papers and everything. It could be something as simple as sitting, and meditating for the highest good and really working with source consciousness together as a team, a team of, whoever, and tapping into to others as well. So because like the last meditation we did, we linked in with other meditation groups around the world. So then even more, I think, then that frequency grows even more and more. And to know that this is one powerful way that we could help make a difference in the world through holding this vibration and intention together. I think that's really key.
You know, thanks. That was a wonderful explanation. I'm thinking about have you ever read the book Awaken the Species?
No.
Conversations with God, book 4, Awaken the Species, from Neil Donald Walsh. And in that book, Neil Donald Walsh channels conversations with God.
Mm-hmm.
And when God said to Neil, share the message that it's time. And it was expressed as it's an invitation to humanity to awaken and awaken the species. And God said, in fact, most people are awake, but they're not aware of it.
Mm.
And so there was quite a lot of conversation about that. But the one thing that, if and this goes back to, you may have heard, we're at a tipping point, and
Mm-hmm.
will humanity save itself or not save itself? And 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 from that book, it's my understanding that that is that is a possibility, that we may go the route of devolution instead of evolution. But we are, the one way of looking at the issue, and you've kind of said it too, we are expressions of the divine. It is our true nature. It's just that so many of us are not aware of it. And so we're being called by our own soul to get back in touch with our true self. And that's, I think that's what the evolutionary, or the evolution of consciousness is about. And that ultimately that's what the evolution of humanity is about, that we really must get back in touch with our own true nature. And so some people believe, well, it absolutely has to happen because, you know, we will wake up eventually to who we truly are. But and so there may still be a question, you know, how much devolution do we choose to experience before that motivates us to look at it differently? You know, Bob Atkinson talks about the process of evolution and or any process of transformation requires conflict and um, working through that learning process of that drives us toward change. So I comment on what I was just saying there.
Well, I see that. I mean, I think we get lessons, right? And if we don't get the lesson, really get what it's about, then we don't necessarily evolve. And I think we're kind of a little bit, or some parts of society right now is a little stuck because we keep doing things the way that we've been doing things.
Right.
And, even at the United Nations, I know there's a lot of people that are somewhat frustrated because we've been addressing the same issue for so many years, like climate change.
Yeah.
And the temperature keeps rising, in certain places around the world. And,
Right.
we know what we need to do to stop this, and we're taking increment steps, but maybe not as quick as we need to in
Right.
order to avert,
Right.
a catastrophe at a real global scale, to the point that, what's going to become of all life on planet, we're going to be affected one way or another. And so what is preventing us from taking these quantum leaps and just making radical change? Is it because we're comfortable? Is it because, industries are, wanting to keep the status quo? What is it that we're participating a lot in our own de-evolution, or how did you say it? And not evolution. Some people are. No, there's a lot of, like we said earlier, there's a lot of hope because we see young people, out there saying, well, we're going to protect our planet, if nobody else is going to do that, and we're going to do whatever we can to make this happen. So they're going full force, which I think is what we need right now. But change, personally, I think change is not happening quick enough.
Yeah. And, and that's, I mean, my own personal response was feeling the um, the pull, the call to undertake this project, to
Mm-hmm.
uh, bring together people talking about this and publish it as a book in the hopes that it can reach more people. And, so I know there are a lot of people who are doing what they can, and we can keep spreading the word. I, the one word that comes up to me that I think it is important, and I don't think I have learned quite how to fully express it yet, but the word is awareness. And what we're talking about here is that people becoming more aware that, oh, we could be living differently. We could be living more true to our nature, and that corrects so many of these inherent problems that we see. And so, it's kind of what, you know, what can somebody do? What can I do um, to bring this idea of awareness of our true nature to a viral thing in the world? It becomes of viral, becomes known. People become aware. And I don't know how that's going to happen. I'm optimistic that it will. Believe it could. I see other things that are less important that go viral and come to people's awareness. So yeah, I have hopes. And do you have further thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's two things. Okay, I think a lot of this has to happen when children are young, right? Whether it's in the home or in the school. There is a program that the UN has called Living Values that UNESCO and Brahma Kumaris and other groups implemented, where they go into the schools and they teach children and older young adults values. So maybe it's one value a week.
Mhm.
So it could be sharing, 1 week. So, and they showed before and after, and it was amazing, So before the kids were kids, no, this is my toy. But then after the kids were like sharing because they understood that was an important part, of being human, right? And cooperation and, how do kids cooperate? And so if you have this early foundation, right, your awareness is going to be very different than just studying, math and science with no sense of how this relates to your own life and your own empowerment, like of being able to be the change you wish to see in the world. So I think that's really key. And second is exactly what you just did. You listen deeply how you can make, a difference in this world, how you can spread awareness. And you came up with, okay, I can interview people that are in the field. I can, create a book, I can do podcasts. And this is like what called you. You listen deeply
Right.
to
Yep.
how you can be part of the solution, right? That you can
Right.
raise awareness. This is so everybody can sit, in meditation or just think, what can I contribute to raising awareness on the planet? And then, do it in as an individual, see if there's ways that you can do it as a group in your classroom, in your workplace. But you can always start from where you're at. And I think if we all just tapped in and thought from our hearts, how much more powerful our hearts are than, even our brains, but
Right.
really tap into our heart and say, how can I best serve?
Right.
How can I best help people to become aware of their true nature, to be aware of their mission on earth? And again, like it's also creating this partnership with the larger pure consciousness, which you're part of, right?
Right.
But we're not communicating as much as we could be. And
Right.
I always feel like when I do communicate in a conscious way that I have, we have consciousness source, but I also have other spiritual partners. Maybe it's my dad who passed away last year, supporting me,
Right.
along the way. Maybe I have spirit guides, I don't know, but I know they're there because I feel this support. And so we have to call on that support and just do it together, again, as a team, as partners wanting the same thing. And that's when miracles start to happen. That's when we see, like I was saying earlier, the synchronicities and we get downloads and a lot becomes life becomes more vibrant, more clear, more luminous. And so I think that's totally key is to really tap in, as much as you can. And then I'm sure whatever divine mission wants, and we have different missions, in life, like maybe because I see, okay, that was my mission for this period of time. Now I'm having, another mission that's coming through. So I'm writing a book. So like, we're always shifting and we're always changing, but we have to be true to ourselves and what our soul is saying, we need to do, even if that means taking risks or changing our current situation, our job, whatever our relationship, whatever maybe we feel is holding us back from accomplishing what it is that we're supposed to do while we're here on earth.
Beautiful. I love that. Yes, very good. And I think that's a good message for everyone. And um, there's many more things that have come up in this conversation that we could explore into, but I think this is probably a good time to bring it to a closure here. And it's been wonderful having you here and sharing your wisdom. You just have so much to share. So thank you very much. But do you have any final words that you'd like to share before we bring it to an end?
Yeah, I would just say live who you really are. Every moment, every day, every hour of your life, consciously be this source consciousness because that's who you are.
Thank you. Well said. Well, Diane Williams, thank you again for being with us today. And again, sharing your wisdom. It's just been wonderful. And I'm going to close the way I always do, and that is to my listeners, have a great day and a great life.
Thank you. Thank you, Raymond.